In this video, you'll learn how to use the Transform Override feature to improve working with objects and animation in Timeflow. To get started, we can open a new basic scene. Before adding Timeflow, we can first see how the Transform Override works with game objects in general. We can select any object, such as the main camera. Since overrides are on by default, we can already see the new Transform editor in the inspector window. This includes sliders and additional editing options, which we'll cover in more detail shortly. First, let's go over how to turn the overrides on and off. Click the gear icon to access the settings menu. Select Disable Overrides if you wish to revert the inspector back to the built-in editor. This triggers scripts to recompile, which may take a moment. We'll then need to reselect the object to view it in the inspector again, now that we can see that the transform is once again showing the built-in editor. If you are working with Unity's built-in animation systems or other features that require the built-in editor, you can return to it at any time needed by disabling the overrides. One other important thing to mention is that when the Timeflow overrides are disabled, a scripting define symbol is added to the player settings. This is required by the Timeflow scripts to enable and disable related features. To turn the overrides back on, click the three dots menu and select Enable Timeflow Overrides. Once again, the scripts will recompile and we can reselect the object to view the new transform editor. You can also enable or disable overrides in the Timeflow preferences. Working with the transform override is the same as when using the built-in editor, except now you have sliders and a number of additional tools. Let's now go over some of those features. Starting from the top left, we first have the ability to lock the transform. When locked, no direct changes can be made through the inspector, though this does not lock the object itself or inhibit its movement in any way. We can also lock each property and attribute separately. Use the lock anytime you want to seal off your work and avoid making any changes accidentally. Next, we have the Coordinates button. This toggles Unity's built-in tool state between local and global coordinates, which can also be accessed in the scene view. It has been added to the Transform editor for convenience, and it controls whether local or global values are displayed. When global mode is enabled, the position, rotation, and scale values show the final computed values for the object's position in world space. In most cases, you'll want to leave this in local mode. The next button enables auto keyframing. If we enable it now, it automatically adds the object to the Timeflow view and enables auto keyframing mode. If we undo this to go back a couple of steps, the alternative is to click the Animate button. This adds the object to the Timeflow view, but does not enable auto keyframing. You'll notice that once an object has been added to the view, that it now has a Timeflow object component. This component is required to be processed by Timeflow. It essentially acts as a container for tracks, channels, and behaviors. If at any time you wish to remove an object from Timeflow, hold the Control key and click the button Remove Timeflow. A confirmation message will appear, warning that all of the Timeflow components will be removed from the game object. The game object is then essentially restored to how it was before adding it to Timeflow. We can add it back in the view by clicking Animate. Once the Timeflow object is initialized, it can safely be removed and re-added to the view as needed. To remove the object from the view, click the button Hide in Timeflow. This simply removes it from the display without destroying anything. We can use this button to toggle the object in and out of the view. Let's add another game object. And then we can duplicate it by pressing Ctrl D a few times. Now that we have several objects, let's go over some of the other display settings. With any object selected, you'll notice the small dark circle next to the button. When clicked, it turns white and toggles the solo mode on for the selected object. This puts the object in a temporary focused mode within the Timeflow view. This can be helpful to isolate an object to work on. Solo mode may be toggled on and off as needed from the inspector or from the Timeflow view. In the Timeflow view, hold the Alt key to reveal the solo mode switches. Simply click on the ones you want to work with, and then click the top switch, while still holding the Alt key, to activate solo mode. Alternatively, use the keyboard shortcut to toggle solo mode on and off for the selected objects. Or if nothing is selected, it toggles the solo mode on and off in the view. If while in solo mode, you select a different object, clicking its solo button will replace the contents of the view with the current selection. And at any time, we can turn off solo mode to return to our original view. One additional feature for hiding objects in the view is mainly used when there is a hierarchy of objects. we can drag to rearrange the game objects as an example. To demonstrate, if I select one of these child objects and then click the button Hide in Timeflow, you'll notice that it works differently than when a root object is selected. That is, an object without a parent. For example, if I select one of these other objects at the root level and then click Hide in Timeflow, we can see that it is fully removed from the view. However, child objects cannot be removed from the view because they belong to a group. As an alternative, display filtering is applied to hide the object instead. You'll notice that the top filtering icon is active and has a red underline. This indicates that the objects are active, hidden from view. Clicking this toggles the mode on and off. For additional information on display filters and using the switches, be sure to see the tutorial linked in the video description. Now that we've covered the basic workflow of getting objects in and out of the Timeflow view, let's start working with some animation. We can select any object to work with as an example. Let's say we want to animate the position. The first decision we'll need to make is whether to use local or global coordinates. It is always advised to use local unless you have a special case that requires global coordinates. So let's make sure that local mode is selected while animating the object. The next decision we need to make is whether to animate the position as a combined XYZ value or as separate X, Y, Z channels. This icon to the left of the fold-out arrow toggles between combined and separate modes. Which mode you choose depends on your objectives and the type of animation being created. To start with, let's animate the object in combined mode. You'll know it's combined because there is only one set of keyframe controls, shown on the right. To start adding animation, we can either click on the stopwatch icon or toggle a keyframe. This adds the local position channel to the Timeflow view, and we can see the first keyframe has been added. By default, channels are highlighted in color to help visually associate the inspector with the channels in the Timeflow view. If you do not wish to see this in your view, or you wish to disable it, click the Settings menu and select Show Channels in Color. To set another keyframe, let's move the time forward. And then let's set the values in the inspector. Notice that no keyframe is set until the keyframe button is pressed. This process can then be repeated to create your animation. To step through the keyframes that have been set, click the arrow buttons. And the stopwatch icon toggles whether the channel is enabled or not. If the stopwatch is off, then the animation is deactivated. While holding the Control key, click the red X to delete the animation channel for that property. Now that we've seen how to manually set keyframes, let's enable auto keyframing to make things a little easier. You'll notice that any existing animation channels are highlighted in red to clearly indicate that keyframe recording is on. If we move to a new time, then make any changes to the property values, then a new keyframe will be set. Switching over to the graph view, we can visualize our animation a little better. Double-click on any keyframe to select it and go to its time. And then any changes made in the inspector automatically update that keyframe. If auto keyframing mode is turned off, changing the values in the inspector will no longer directly affect the keyframes. With auto keyframing enabled, we can also record changes on properties that haven't been animated yet. For example, let's take rotation this time, switching to separate mode, so that we now see keyframe controls for each axis of rotation independently. If I click to make a change to any value, it adds a new animation channel and records a keyframe with that value. At any time, we can press the spacebar to preview our animation. Note that while Timeflow is playing, you may not be able to set keyframes unless you enable it in the preferences. Now that we've covered basic usage and animation features, we'll now go over some of the more advanced features of the Transform Editor. When the sliders are open, you'll notice that there are two buttons which can be used to toggle the slider mode. The first option on the left is a standard slider with a minimum and maximum value. The second option is a centered slider, useful for making micro adjustments. In this mode, the slider works at a finer scale to make minor tweaks easier. To show more settings, click the pencil icon. This displays additional configurations for this slider, allowing you to customize the min and max values and set the micro adjustment scale. The min and max values can be refined uniformly or independently for each axis. The settings you enter here apply only to the editor for this game object. The existing values can be quickly modified by using the shortcut buttons to multiply by 10, divide by 10, or multiply by 2 and divide by 2. Click the Reset button to revert the slider settings to their default values. The default values may be defined for the whole project in the Timeflow Preferences in the Override section. One important note regarding the min and max values is that these define the target range, but if any values are set outside of the range, the sliders adapt and do not automatically apply limits to the property. Another feature we'll now go over is Copy, Paste, and Reset. If you hold down the Shift key, the Transform Editor displays additional buttons next to each property. Or we can go into the Settings menu and enable Show Reset Copy Paste to keep the buttons visible. These provide the ability to reset, copy, and paste values. This can be used on individual attributes, groups, or the whole transform. That concludes this video on using the Transform Override Editor in Timeflow.